And shall we get right into it?
Absolutely. I've been
All right.
seeing the tweets, but you're going to be able to tell me better than anyone else. So go ahead, sir.
Okay, so obviously this centers around Jake Paul, Canelo Alvarez, Terrence Crawford, and Turkey Al-Sheikh, but there are other players involved as well. Following the success of Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, and what I mean by success, I mean the amount of attention and viewers and business that it generated. Um, the attention was then turned to a fight between Jake Paul and Canelo Alvarez sometime in 2025. And so, as I reported yesterday, in the midst of all of this, those talks were a very real thing, and they were moving along. It wasn't just a pie in the sky idea. You know, we were kind of going through footage, mainly my guy Spencer, who does a tremendous job on our social media, of all the times Jake Paul had talked about Canelo really since the Tyron Woodley fight, the first one, dating back to the summer of 2021. And there are numerous occasions where he says, in 2-3 years, I'm going to fight Canelo. And there are numerous occasions where Canelo is asked about Jake Paul and he laughs it off. And he says, come on, guys, ask me a serious question. And media would laugh it off, but he stuck to it. And even, you know, the week of the Tyson fight, he was talking about Canelo Alvarez. And so following that fight, that's where they turned their attention. And finally, there appeared to be interest on the side of Canelo. Now, Canelo has made no bones about the fact that he is a businessman. Payday, payday. That's what he always says, right? If you're going to pay me, if you're going to sign a big fat check and give it to me, I'm in. Eddie Hearn mentioned that earlier this week when talking to the media in the UK. Canelo Alvarez has no loyalty whatsoever, and he is very open about this. He just goes where the money is, and that's not a knock on him. He's a prize fighter, and he should do that because this game is going to end for him at some time, maybe in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and so he needs to get the most amount of money possible. And so this is happening. This is happening. These two guys are talking, the two entities are talking, and they're moving towards a potential showdown in May, Cinco de Mayo weekend. At the same time as all of this, there is great interest from Turkey Al-Sheikh and Riyadh season to put on a Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford fight. So these two conversations are happening somewhat in parallel. One has nothing to do with the other. MVP has nothing to do with Riyadh season. Riyadh season has nothing to do with MVP. But there's a guy in the middle, Canelo Alvarez, who's kind of talking to both entities. Now, my understanding is, as far as MVP is concerned, they didn't really care about the Terrence Crawford fight. One fight's happening in May. One fight is scheduled to happen in September. I did get the impression, and this came to light last night, that let's just say the Riyadh season side of things weren't too keen on the guy who they're about to pay a ton of money to fight Terrence Crawford in a football stadium in September is going to then go down this sort of, you know, different path against Jake Paul. Because let's be honest to the public, and you saw this when the stories really started to come to a head yesterday, if you're taking a Jake Paul fight when you've got a potential showdown with Crawford, a fight that everyone wants to see against David Benavidez, a potential rematch with Dimitri Bivol down the line, the fans start to view you in a different light, and there's a backlash there. And so the side in September was saying, like, we don't love this. But at the same time, these two things were happening. On Monday, we get a report from The Ring, which, let's be honest, owned by Turkey Al-Sheikh. He doesn't hide this. They made a big announcement. They had a big gala. Everyone knows what it is. When they come out and say Canelo versus Terrence Crawford is close to being done, you take that as gospel because, of course, it's essentially coming from him. He owns the outlet, right? It's like back in the day when The Ring was owned by Oscar De La Hoya. When they would report on Golden Boy things, you knew it was pretty much a done deal. And so after that, the Jake Paul Canelo stuff started to come out. And then after that came out, we had the Allegiant Stadium story come out. And September 13th, more color to this Crawford fight. So it almost felt like this tit for tat was going on. All right, that's Monday, that's Tuesday, that's Wednesday. Eddie Hearn is starting to talk about done deal. It wasn't a done deal. It was never signed, sealed, and delivered. It was just all part of these negotiations. The Jake Paul side saying, like, we're cool. Let's get the May fight done. You do your business afterwards. This side saying, we're not really too keen on this May one. Just focus on what we're trying to do here. No one's the bad guy here, but there's just two different interests, two different POVs. Yesterday, everything blows up. First, it's the Eddie Hearn talks, right? Eddie Hearn is saying, I hear it's a done deal. Okay, it wasn't a done deal. Then you start to hear that Turkey Al-Sheikh has taken the Canelo Crawford fight off the table, and now he's going to start to focus on a Crawford Boots Ennis fight in September. Now, Boots Ennis is fighting a really tough guy named Emantas Stanionis on April 12th in Atlantic City. Don't know how much credence there was to that. He has to get by that fight first, Terence Crawford, before focusing on a Canelo Alvarez fight. But this all felt to me like a bit of gamesmanship. So all of a sudden, this becomes an announcement. All right, then, you know, we hear that the fight is done. And then we go, I'll be honest, I go to bed at like 10:30 after celebrating Josh Allen winning the MVP award like a pig in shit.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And then I wake up in the middle of the night to a litany of texts and phone calls and things of that nature saying that the Jake Paul fight is off, that at the 11th hour, there was a change of heart, and now Canelo Alvarez is going in the direction of Turki Al-Sheikh, that he's agreed to this 4-fight deal, that he's going to fight in May, that he's going to fight maybe Bruno Suarez, who, you know, had the huge upset in December over Jaime Munguia, or Jermell Charlo, and then in September fight Crawford, and then 2 more fights. And now he has essentially left the Jake Paul negotiations and is fully on Turki Al-Sheikh. That's essentially, you know, on his side and teaming up with Riyadh Season. That's essentially what we've been told. I will tell you this, there was no 11th hour change of heart. It wasn't like Canelo Alvarez was sitting at a table yesterday on Thursday with a gun to his head saying, you got to pick one. You got to. No, that was a little bit of, you know, I don't want to say misreporting, but I'll say misreporting. There was no 11th hour change of heart. He had 2 options. One side said, we're okay with both options. The other side said, nah, we're not too keen. Come with us. And as a result of this option being here, this side over here, meaning the Riyadh Season side, essentially upped the ante. And so did Canelo use Jake Paul? I don't think that's a fair thing. I think he wanted both options. But the fact that there was the Jake Paul fight there only made them up the ante and sort of like sweeten the pot to not just a Terence Crawford fight, but to this 4-fight mega deal that he has now agreed to with Turki Al-Sheikh. And so as you can tell, MVP not happy with it, Jake Paul not happy with it. This morning, Most Valuable Promotions posting a statement essentially saying that, you know, this, you know, there was talks, there wasn't a negotiation going on. I think we have the statement. We could show it now if we have it. This was a real thing, but we're moving on. Here it is for everyone to read, and it's a pretty aggressive statement. MVP was in deep negotiations for a blockbuster fight between Jake Paul and Canelo Alvarez on Cinco de Mayo weekend in Las Vegas. We know this, a massive event for the Mexican, Puerto Rican, and American fans, and it's disappointing to see how the situation unfolded. MVP operates with integrity, transparency, and respect for the sport, its athletes, and the fans. Unfortunately, not everyone in the boxing world shares those values. The situation is a reminder not to believe everything you read, especially when the current media environment is often controlled by those with hidden agendas, including promoters who have reporters on their payroll. I have no knowledge of this. I don't know what they're getting at there, but clearly there's some feelings here. We remain in active discussions with multiple high-profile opponents and are committed to delivering the biggest fights, the most exciting events, and to working with partners who share our values and our commitment to boxing and its fighters. Jake Paul isn't going anywhere. Neither is MVP. We'll continue to disrupt boxing on our terms. Last night, Turki Al-Sheikh posted a video, you know, celebrating the fact that he got this deal done and perhaps sending a message to Jake Paul and Nikisa Badarian. We have that video, and we could play it now.
Canelo in Riyadh in May, the big fight in the history of boxing. In September, then 2 more fights in 26. Don't miss with the line.
Terrifying.
I think I speak on behalf of all boxing fans. We want those 2 fights in 26 to be Benavidez and Bivol. If he gets by Terence Crawford, if he doesn't, there's going to be a rematch, no doubt about it. So there you have it. And Jake Paul went on social media as well and said some things about Canelo Alvarez, and he's obviously very upset. You could see it here, and put those, you know, those AI pictures. Here's the part that no one is talking about right now. And I'll drop this and I'll let you guys talk about UFC 312. I do believe that there is a sort of deeper struggle here. And the struggle dates back to MVP, Jake Paul, and Nikisa Badarian's relationship or lack thereof with TKO and specifically the UFC. It's very clear that there's a great relationship between Riyadh Season, TKO, the UFC, WWE. You saw a picture last week, Nick Khan, president of WWE, Dana White, Turki Al-Sheikh, all in Riyadh, right? And I do believe that the entities involved did not want the guy that they're about to invest a lot of money in to have a mega fight with Jake Paul before their mega fight. And so I believe that there were these two forces at play, and ultimately Canelo Alvarez decided, I'm going to go with these guys. And by the way, the reporting of the information May 3rd coming out yesterday, I don't think was coincidence, in the sense that perhaps there was a little litmus test being done there, because you see, once that story came out, and look at ESPN's reporting, they said it was all but done, right? How did it go from all but done to a change of heart? No, putting it out there to maybe try to get to see, you know, how the public would react to it. And let's be honest, the public said, we don't want this. The public said, we want Benavidez. The public said, we want Crawford. We want Canelo to still be in the serious fight business, for lack of a better word. That's how they view those fights, as opposed to a Jake Paul fight. And I think the Jake Paul fight could still happen for Canelo in 2-3 years. I think he could choose to. It's still there. And I think, you know, Jake would obviously still explore that. But I think he saw that stuff. They upped the ante. I wouldn't be surprised if TKO is involved in the promotion for the upcoming fight in September. We know they want to get into the boxing business. There's been talks of them really trying to launch this in the fall with Turkey. This is all out there. The New York Times has reported it. And so in the end, they won this war. It was waged on the sort of boxing battlefields, and it came to a head last night. And it seems like now Jake Paul is going to have to look in a different direction. The big question is, what direction is that? Tommy Fury can't travel to the United States unless this current presidential regime changes that. And I don't think he wants to explore, you know, influencer fights or MMA fights or KSI fights. And so he had a massive Canelo fight. And in the end, Canelo said, once again, payday. And they ended up delivering the payday.
Wow, that is quite a lot of information you've given us there. Thank you so much, Ariel. I wanted to ask, though, you mentioned MVP. They didn't care about the situation, right? They would have happily allowed him sign this deal with Riyadh season as long as the Jake Paul one goes ahead. You mentioned Riyadh season. They had an issue with it. You then mentioned later on about TKO and their relationship or potential relationship with Turki Al-Sheikh and Nick Khan and things like that. What do you think Riyadh, the reason Riyadh season were so against the Jake Paul Canelo fight happening? Did they think it was going to delegitimize Canelo, one of the greatest of his generation, to fight Jake Paul, or do you think it's because of this relationship that they have with TKO and their long history with Jake Paul?
You know, Turkey has been quite he's been quite transparent about the fact that he doesn't love these fights. He doesn't like the influencer fights. He has said this several times. Remember when they did the Jake Paul Tommy Fury fight? He wasn't really involved in that one. That was kind of pre him really getting involved. It really all started, of course, with the Tyson Fury Francis Ngannou fight. And so you saw last night. What did he say? Canelo fights real fighters, something to that effect. That's obviously talking about Jake Paul. And so you know, he's not dabbling in this world. There are no influencer fights. There are no crossover fights on the Riyadh season cards, whether they're in America or in Saudi Arabia. And I think he really wants to be in business with Canelo. He's a big, you know, he's an old school boxing fan. He's an old school boxing fan, and he doesn't love the idea of being involved in this type of in this type of fights. And I think that he had an issue, and I don't think he's wrong for it, saying like, look, we're going to pay you a ton of money. Like, let's do a deal where you're fighting under our umbrella, under our banner, representing what we're representing, and you're not doing this mega fight first. Not because I think he thinks that he's going to lose to Jake Paul or anything like that, but you could slip on a banana peel and tear your ACL or turn an ankle or God knows what. But also, I think that there's a part of them that we definitely know that the TKO side doesn't like MVP. We know that for a fact, yes. Right? I think for Turkey himself, I don't think there's a beef with MVP, but I think like he wanted to win this battle, and he ultimately did. And winning the battle meant, Jake, you don't get this fight. We got our man. He's going to fight in Riyadh on Cinco de Mayo weekend, and then he fights in Las Vegas in September, and then we see what happens after that.
It feels like a very public defeat for Jake Paul, and you can see that he's out here posting the AI image of Canelo Alvarez on his knees, the MVP statement, which we've already put up. I feel like this isn't going to be the last we hear of this. It's also a massive win, it feels, for Turki Al-Sheikh, right? Like he keeps talking about the line, don't mess with the line. Yeah. He sees himself as, I guess, the king of the jungle or so to speak. Do you expect that we're going to hear more from Jake Paul on this? Can he respond, or is this simply Turki Al-Sheikh showing like, I'm the man now? You can't play these big boy games essentially.
So I'll say this, and then I want to pass it over to Ben and Shaheen so you guys can focus
Yeah.
on UFC 312. Yes, if we're scoring this battle, yeah, it's a 10-9 round, right? It's a 30-27 or whatever it is, because he got his guy, and ultimately Jake did not get the fight. I would say that there's a bit of a moral victory for the MVP side, if only that a year ago, 2 years ago, Canelo and his team were laughing at the notion of even the question,
Yeah.
like we went through the footage, like he would laugh it off. I think there's even a time where our good pal Donna Corby is asking him, and he's just like, come on, guys. You know what I mean? Like, this is not a real thing. And so the fact that they were there, 11th hour or not, red zone or not, goal line or whatever the hell analogy you want to use, the fact that this was an active negotiation, a real thing, is some sort of acknowledgement that they've made it this far, right? But yes, in the end, he does not have a fight in May against Canelo. It would have been a huge deal. It would have made a ton of money. We can have the argument all day, which fight generates more interest. I said it on the show earlier this week. Like, my kids know who Jake Paul is. They don't know who Terrence Crawford is. So, but that it's just a different game. But ultimately, yes, Turkey gets his guy. He says, "Don't mess with the lion." And this is why, once again, I say, as far as all combat sports are concerned, right now, as a journalist, there is no more fascinating world than the world of boxing. This cannot exist in MMA or pro wrestling. It does not exist. It doesn't exist in kickboxing, in jiu-jitsu. It's a crazy thing. You have the biggest star making hundreds of millions of dollars involved in this tug of war, and then this relatively new player comes in, backed by this country, and then also you have the TKO involvement, and you have Jake and Nikisa and like all this stuff, not to mention all the other wackiness going on. And how about this? And I'll leave it at this. April 26th, we're going to get Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank. Then we're going to get supposedly a potential Times Square fight 6 days later, where Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia are fighting on the same card in the middle of Times Square.
Wow.
The next day, we were supposed to get Jake Paul versus Canelo. Now we're getting Canelo over in Riyadh. That's all in the span of 7 days, not to mention all the other Meshugas that is coming our way. It's a crazy time. I love it. And God bless all the players involved. Thank you for the entertainment.
God bless you, Ariel Helwani. That was great stuff. Check this kid out, Ariel Helwani. You heard him here first. He's got a big future. No, but thanks so much, Ariel. That's absolutely brilliant. Congratulations again, Josh Allen.
Thank you.
Fantastic to see.
Thank you.
He was
Thank
my
you.
MVP.
Thank you. Thank you.
That team around him, absolutely horrific. But anyway,
Yeah.
Ariel, we love you. Thanks very much. See you soon. Thank you for the info. And now, my God, what a tornado of intel the great Ariel Helwani just gave us there. So much to talk about. But I'm not as intelligent as the other two people we've got on the show as well. We have Shaheen Al-Shatti and Ben Fowlkes. And lads, I mean, I thought we were going to be talking about Sean Strickland and saying you guys for the whole episode, but we got a lot there from Mr. Ariel Helwani, who was kind of laid it out for us there. There is an MVP v Riyadh season beef all of a sudden in boxing. Al-Shatti, I know you were up all night because this story was happening as we all slept. Well, me, definitely. I was asleep. Tell me, did anything there perk your ears as Helwani was breaking it down? I know you have your finger on the pulse of this story too.
Last night was absurd, man. Last night was genuine. Like, being in the center of all of this and just, trying to navigate these waters. Ariel is completely right when he says boxing is in such a more interesting place right now than a lot of these other combat sports, just because the last night really showed like the awkward state that this sport is in now that it has been fully basically taken over by Turki Al-Sheikh. Like, the incestuous nature of him owning the Ring magazine and essentially like dribbling out these little details and basically forming the narrative and forcing boxing media to essentially just like follow the ebbs and flows of his own outlet throughout this whole process. Like, there's a broader conversation about all of this to be had there, because it was just incredibly bizarre to navigate as someone who does what we do. But just the theater of all of it, man, was unreal. Like the speed with which all of this was changing was minute by minute. It's crazy story.
It's insane. Yeah. Ben, it feel like when I'm looking, I don't know if you got to see Jake Paul's post there with the AI image of Canelo Alvarez. Feels like he's not taking this one lightly, but I guess my question is, and based on what Shaheen has just said there, is there any way of biting back against this guy, the Lion, as he is now calling himself? Like, I mean, it feels like a pretty impossible task to be able to outmoney this guy, or out media the guy, as Shaheen just said, like he owns the ring now. And I'm sure we can talk about some of the reporting that went on over the last few hours later on. But is there any way Jake can step to this guy, essentially?
Here's my question about the whole thing, and what I would have wanted to ask Ariel for his take on after everything he just told us is how much of this is sort of just ego? Because and getting your way, being like, I don't like the influencer fights. I don't want to see that. I want this to work my way, and so I'm going to spend whatever money it takes and exert whatever force it takes to get things my way. Because honestly, if you were in it just for pure profit, just to make big fights and make money off those fights, wouldn't a Canelo fight against Jake Paul in May be to your benefit to help you build up Jake Paul or Canelo in front of an audience that doesn't really know that much about him or doesn't really know his story quite as much before you turn around and book him into the big fight with Terrence Crawford in September? Because I get saying that you think it makes him look a little different. You think it makes the audience view Canelo differently if he's out here fighting the influencers. That is a non-serious fight. But also, as we saw when Jake Paul fought Mike Tyson, a very unserious fight, and the world stopped what it was doing to watch that thing on Netflix, even when it meant Mike Tyson having his whole ass out. Like, it was not a serious event, and yet it was a massively watched event. And so if you were turning around trying to book a big fight for Canelo, you bring a different audience in by having him fight somebody like Jake Paul in May. You get a lot of people who aren't that plugged into the real boxing world, especially they see a guy who is a real boxer at sort of the height of his powers go in there and, let's be honest, if he wants to absolutely thrash Jake Paul, and he becomes kind of a hero to a whole lot of people who came out of that Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight being A, mad that they didn't get much of a fight, and B, feeling ongoingly annoyed at Jake Paul's whole thing, especially when he's picking on a senior citizen, basically. They want to see that guy get beat up for all of that. Here's a way you could offer them that while also get a lot of the Jake Paul, very young, not that super hardcore boxing crowd into Canelo. Then they might follow you to another Canelo fight when you have an opportunity to tell them how big this next one's going to be in September. Like, it seems like it's not entirely bad for the brand, but just that once you decide, hey, I don't like the influencer fights, I don't want that shadow cast over our fight that we're planning in September, therefore I'm going to exert all this pressure to stop it. That seems like at least part of that has to be about a rich, powerful person just wanting to get his way.
Do you think it's got?
I don't even.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off, PC, but I don't even think it's part of it. I think that's a large majority.
That's all of it,
right? I mean, it feels as if, and talking to people around this situation, that this essentially turned into a demeasuring contest at a certain point Thursday, and it's just like I've said this a couple times to a couple people, but like when you're playing a game of chicken against somebody who doesn't care if they live or die. Like, you're just going to lose that game over and over again. And that's right now is Turkey Al-Shatti in the sport. He has unlimited resources to be able to do whatever he wants. And at a certain point, like, what's your number, right? If you're Canelo Alvarez, and it's like you have over here this prospect of this Netflix fight that will probably be realistically for however dumb it is, we can put that aside, but this would be the most watched fight of what, in the past like 30, 40 years, just within the combat sports as a whole. Like, you put Canelo and everything that he brings, then you put Jake Paul and everything that he brings, you put that on Netflix. Like, that's just a monstrous situation, right? But like, again, what's your number? How high do I have to go, Canelo, before you just say, I'm good on this Netflix thing, thanks? Like, the fact that again, it's just so crazy. It felt like this was the ultimate missile strike to Jake Paul from Turkey Al-Sheikh, who, as Ariel said, has very publicly not been a fan of this guy and what he's done and sort of what he's done in the space, and especially the Mike Tyson thing for a while. And to be able to deliver a blow like this, Ariel called it a 10-9. I call this a 10-8, man. When you have reports out there from ESPN saying this fight is nearly finalized, like Canelo Paul is happening, more or less. And then 2 hours later, everybody has to retract that, and Jake has to take that public loss and now just wear it, as we're seeing on these statements. That to me feels like the ultimate strike from Turkey.
Am I looking into it too much? Then I asked Ariel about it here to think that it's it may be have something to do with that affiliation that is developing between Dana and Turkey, and we know that Dana has been a long time kind of verbal sparring partner of Jake Paul's. Like, am I looking into it too much to think that Turkey was kind of like, well, let's throw a spanner in the works, compliments of my new friend Dana White?
I mean, I could see that being at least part of it, but also it does seem like I wonder about if your strategy is let's freeze Jake Paul out of boxing, like, or let's deny him some of these big dream fights that he would like to have. He's not really going anywhere. Jake Paul can still pick a fight with somebody else, and honestly, pick a fight that's way more winnable for him than Canelo Alvarez is.
Remotely winnable.
Yeah, like Jake Paul has been doing it for years now, to the point where every time he has one of these fights, like the Mike Tyson thing, we are all essentially the Jesse Pinkman gif saying he can't keep getting away with it, and he does. He does keep getting away with it. And so I don't know if it is really hurting what Jake Paul actually does to be like, no, we will not let you get the absolute snot beat out of you by Canelo Alvarez. You will instead have to find someone else who you can continue running your game on, that you'll probably beat, and we'll hate you for it, but we'll also kind of be tricked into watching, because that's his talent. At this point, way more than any talent he has for boxing is a talent for self-promotion and target selection, and intermingling those two. So he's going to figure something else out. I don't know if you're really hurting him so much as you're just being able to say, we wanted this, we got it, ha ha, in your face.
Well, it's
I think just to add to that real quick, I think there's obviously value for Turkey for the aha, we got this in your face, like that, to have that notch into your belt is something to that guy. But also just like looking at the options now for Jake, like, sure, I'm sure they'll pivot to something because they're very good at finding the next thing that will capture everyone's imagination and just like make everyone so infuriated, as Ben just laid out. But like the downgrade from Canelo to whatever this is, whether it's Tommy Fury or, Darren Till or whatever type of person we're looking for, the downgrade from Canelo to that is so impossibly vast. Like, whatever your second place in this running is not even close to what Canelo could have done.
Yeah, but I guess you do, if you're Jake Paul, you get at least a little bit of the daps for being willing and really eager to go fight Canelo. Because now you can say, like, hey, look, I wasn't just talking when I was saying that I wanted to fight Canelo. I thought we had a deal. I thought that we were going to actually do this. And then it was Canelo who went and took more money to go do something else elsewhere. I really am about this life. I want to be a boxer. I want to prove it. I was going to go in there and fight Canelo, and he ran from me. Like, Jake Paul, as you saw with that AI image and everything, like, he can and will make some hay out of that alone. I agree that whatever you do, whatever opponent you do manage to find, and however you try to spin it into, here's why the public should be interested in this fight, it's not going to be anything close to you fighting Canelo. But also, if you're Canelo, you probably look at it and be like, hey, I can always fight Jake Paul later. As long as Jake Paul's around, as long as Jake Paul doesn't, wrap a Lamborghini around a telephone pole or something, and as long as he's still in the game, I can continue to fight real fights for a couple more years. And then once the skills declined, I can go over, get an easy payday to whoop Jake Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, Canelo's got like 12 or 13 more years before he lands in the Jake Paul spectrum for opponents, right? Like, he's got some time. He's only in his 30s.
By that time, Jake Paul will be the president of the United States of America.
It could happen. It could happen based on what's going on these days in this world we live in. Lads, that was great. But in case you didn't know, there's a bit of an event happening in Australia tomorrow. It's UFC 312 DDP v. Sean Strickland 2. There has been a lot of media, a lot of talking points about that main event, but in the co-main event, I think it is the most interesting fight for a lot of people within the sport. It is Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez. Suarez 10-0, a person we all thought that would be in this spot for a very long time. It is finally happening now. We can see them facing off there. Compliments of the beautiful on-air Jordan. But lads, before we get to the co-main event, just in terms of this main event, I've been watching Sean Strickland hold court, I guess you'd call it, at these media days and whatnot. And I kind of feel like maybe this is me as a guy who doesn't live in the United States or whatever, but I kind of feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong, Shaheen, I feel like Strickland feels like this is like the perfect era for him to be talking the way he does, maybe be embraced on a new level. Tell me what you've taken away from what you've seen from Sean Strickland this week, who seems to really, really want people to be outraged by him. That's my takeaway from this guy.
I think you're not. I think you're spot on with the last thing you said, and that Sean seems like a guy who delights and revels in the people being upset at him, in the outrage, in the clutching of the pearls of, I can't believe this guy said this again. And in that sense, like, the framing of your question is interesting to me, because it's like, is he a perfect type of fighter, perfect type of UFC champion for the moment? I almost feel like he's not, right? Because the bar has moved. The bar has lowered to such a crazy degree, in particular recently with, Hitler is a good guy type of conversations percolating throughout the sport. Just through where the world is right now, like your ability to outrage people, like, you gotta really, really be doing some wild shit to really outrage people at this point. Like, it's a lot of it just comes off as noise at this point. And so I wonder if he is the perfect fighter for the moment in that sense, because I feel like it is so much more difficult to draw that outrage, so much more difficult to get people as upset with you as he was doing last year, the year before, and all of that. Ben wrote a really interesting column on this for Uncrowned earlier this week, so I'd love to hear his thoughts on this, because it feels as almost, maybe this is just me and the way I've been consuming this fight week, but it almost feels like, I don't know, the Sean Strickland shtick isn't hitting in the same way. Like, people still clearly love him, and he still has the crowd on his side, but it doesn't feel like it's garnering the type of momentum that it has in past fights. And I don't know if that's just this fight itself, because obviously there's a rematch. We just saw this guy. We just saw these two guys fight. Sean hasn't really been super impressive since that fight, right? Like, he only has that one victory over Paulo Costa that nobody really enjoyed. But also maybe it's the confluence of just like people kind of figuring out that when he says he's going to fight to the death, he really just means he's going to go out there and throw some teep kicks and some jabs and Philly shell it up, and you know what you're going to get with it. So, like, the bill of goods, like, we kind of understand what we're actually being sold with Sean. So maybe there's an element to that, but I'd be curious for Ben's thoughts on this, because it just feels like it's maybe not hitting to the degree that it has in past fights. And that's very curious to me.
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of factors. I do think that part of Sean Strickland's edgelord gimmick is that I'm going out here and I'm willing to say the things that the other people are just thinking, or that people are, constantly saying on the internet. I'm willing to, speak these outrageous truths or whatever, and I don't care if I get in trouble. That partly doesn't work anymore, because clearly you're not gonna get in trouble in the UFC. If you don't really get in any trouble, if there's nothing that actually happens to you except Dana White calling you on the phone and yelling at you when you say you want to go fishing with Adolf Hitler, and
Jesus Christ.
to turn around and be like, I don't know, I think that women should be in the kitchen, doesn't seem that outrageous by comparison. And it's not like, hey, I'm willing to like step up and I don't care about the corporate overlords. The corporate overlords don't care about the stuff you're saying. If anything, they want it. You saw the UFC retweet the front of the Australian tabloid newspaper or whatever it was that said like the UFC's biggest imbecile, Sean Strickland, somebody knock him out. And the UFC was pleased with that. They were like, this is what we want. This is publicity for this fight. I think that that's part of it, is that just by comparison to what else is going on and the environment that we've seen, Sean Strickland seems, if anything, like almost just mainstream for UFC fighter political and social views at this point. So it's not as outrageous as he wants it to be or as it used to be. I think the other part of it is we already saw this fight once. This was the rematch kind of no one asked for, aside from Sean Strickland. You did not have a whole bunch of people just being like, when are we going to see these two lions in the same cage again? We got to see Sean Strickland get a rematch, especially not coming off that Paulo Costa fight like you said, Shaheen, because we watched that one and it was no fun at all. And some of that is Paulo Costa's fault, but some of that is Sean Strickland's style. And yeah, I think you can only pull the wool over people's eyes where you talk about it as if you are headed into a gladiatorial bloodbath for so long before they've seen a couple of these fights and they realize you're not really. You're a point fighter. You're going to try to win these rounds a little bit at a time and go 5 full rounds and then win a close decision. That's your style. That's what works for you. He's really good at that style, but it does not match up with what he says before the fights. And I think that people are starting to get a little clued into that. The final factor I think might be it's Super Bowl weekend. You're trying to make some noise in the at least North American sports landscape this particular week. You're all the way over there in Australia. You're going to do well in Australia just because they have such a passionate UFC and MMA fan base that they're buying tickets. They're showing up as soon as you announce you're having an event. They don't wait to see who's on it. But over here, you're trying to kind of use the outrage to get a little bit of media attention, but it's sports Christmas on Sunday, man. And that's what a lot of people are focused on. It's hard to get a piece of more mainstream, broader media attention this week.
Yeah, I was just laughing as you were saying that. Like, I can think of no word like Strickland would be insulted by more than saying, "Do you know what, Sean? You are so mainstream, man. You have just, you know what? Oh my God, he would absolutely hate that." It's funny to me that you mentioned like they're trying to draw all these eyeballs. Is this Pereira's role to some degree as well? Like he's kind of edging himself in here. Strickland's kind of setting it up. Oh, he really hates DDP. He's so keen to get him going. It's added a layer of intrigue to me in terms of like if DDP wins this, like is that a potential matchup? Will they try and sell this as like, you know, Pereira wants revenge for his long-term training partner, Sean Strickland, who he's trained with maybe a handful of times, Shaheen. Is this the way we're going with this?
DDP Pereira? No, man. I mean, I haven't believed this Alex Pereira back to middleweight thing from jump. Like the moment this became even a talking point and Alex sort of like teasing this, it just felt to me like it made no sense. Like, what's the gain if you're Alex Pereira from doing that, right? You've already done that. You've been there. You beat, sort of like the second best middleweight probably we've ever seen in Izzy at his peak. Like that whole series was so dramatic. The whole rivalry was so dramatic. What are you gaining if you go back there and you regain the title that you already had? Like the heavyweight discussion seems like the central focus for Alex. I just don't want to see that man make 185 pounds ever again in his entire life. I look at that gigantic human being, and at no point have I understood how he ever made 185. And I just don't need to see it ever again because it's very clear that like the best version of Alex Pereira is not at 185 pounds. There's nothing that fight does nothing for me.
Yeah, I actually I don't know if you saw Michael Bisping's comments on it. I actually agreed with him when he was talking about why is Alex Pereira going over here and, with 5 or 6 weeks before his title fight, taking the risk to fly to Australia, kind of interrupt his training camp and corner Sean Strickland. And he was pointing out, look, he's probably going to make a lot of money. Well, he's over there. You go over there during a UFC week, you make some appearances. We know he's been sort of traveling the globe doing hey, come see the champ, take a seminar from the champ sort of stuff. He's no stranger to that at this point. You probably will go over there and pocket some good cash. And I think at this point, Alex Pereira probably pretty confident that he goes in there and beats Magomed Ankalaev. Like, I don't think he's thinking like, hey, I need to be like Rocky IV in the cabin in Siberia. I think I'm going to win, and I can go over here. I'll still come back and have a month left to train. It's going to be all right, and I'm going to put some money in my pocket. I think Bisping's probably onto something there.
Yeah, it sounds about right. And it's funny, I was looking through our rankings, which we all contribute to, lads. Dricus not in the top 10. We have picked him in our top 10s, but he isn't in the top 10 list for whatever reason.
The disrespect that man.
Who's leaving him out?
This is the angle. I don't know. Like I've seen Shimoyev is in ahead of him, funnily enough, and we'll get to him in a few minutes. But the issue I see here is, as Ben said at the start, this is the rematch nobody really wants to see. And Dricus can come away with a win and he can keep his title, but does it extend his legacy at all, Al-Shatti, for him to go in here and probably get a decision win over Strickland again? Like, but my basic question is, if he wins this, will he be propelled up in the uncrowned rankings?
I mean, you have to ask the folks who are not putting him in the top 10. That seems insane to me. And I frankly think we should be calling them out right now. How's that guy going to not be in your top 10? Like, look at some of the names he's beaten. Like legacy talk, I am unwilling to go to legacy talk already with DDP. He is so new to this. He is so fresh to the title scene. He's just one title defense essentially into it, right? Like I'm not willing to have that conversation yet. So in that sense, like, it perpetuates his title reign, and that in and of itself is the goal, right? Like, it gets us to the more interesting places that we want to go, because you just framed it like, of the options that are available for, like, say this fight wasn't booked and I was just asking you straight up, hey, middleweight, what do you want to do with this title picture? I think for a lot of people, this would be the third choice between sort of all the options, and like maybe second, because like Imavov, Nasruddin Imavov isn't exciting a lot of people right now. Like, I dude's not exploding with personality, so maybe like Strickland would be above that. But like, the fight we all want to see is Chimaev. And the fight we've all wanted to see for a long time is Khamzat Chimaev fighting for this title. And it seems like now this new administration with Dana White's ties to it, like that he'll be able to travel a little more freely potentially. And like, that'll open up that option a little bit better than it has been in past. But like, that's what we're all just waiting for. This very much feels like it's just a placeholder to get us to the Chimaev fight that we have been waiting for basically 5 years now.
Yeah. Ben, do you think either of these guys, right? Like, we obviously don't know what's going to happen in this main event. Would you pick either of these guys to beat Chimaev right now?
No. But let's
didn't even hesitate. No. Not even a second. Jeez.
I think stylistically, as much as anything, Khamzat is just a problem for both those guys. And let's not discount the possibility that Sean Strickland could win this fight. It was a close fight the first time.
Yes, that's true.
And I think, honestly, the way DDP won the fight the first time was mostly vibes, because Sean Strickland's fighting style, like we've seen a lot of people employ, it relies on winning rounds by a relatively small margin. And so you're relying on the judges to appreciate the work that you're doing. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they miss it if it's not big and obvious. And DDP, while I think he takes a lot of crap from the MMA community, because we look at him fight and we go, this guy isn't good. He can't be this good. And yet he's won every single UFC fight he's had. He keeps stopping people in most of those fights. The results would seem to indicate he's really, really good. It's just when we watch him, we go, he's not even good. How is he doing this? But when he is out there throwing some of these punches, whether they connect or not, he looks like he's doing a lot. And Sean Strickland's style, it's very sort of like casual and relaxed and easy, but it doesn't look like he's doing a lot. It doesn't look like he's really doing a ton of damage. And so I think like that's how DDP edged him out. That could flip and go the other way if the judges start to appreciate on one night what Sean Strickland's doing. He'll tell you if he doesn't get a clash of heads and get cut open and get blood in his eyes, it would have been a different fight. Whatever, he could absolutely win that fight. But I do kind of feel for the disrespect that DDP gets, just because we keep watching him beat quality middleweights, at times finishing quality middleweights, and then we go, okay, but the next one is going to get you. I don't know how you made it this far, but it won't last. And it's like we're watching him have a really good run at middleweight, and the entire time we're being like, but you suck. We feel confident in our hearts that you suck, despite the results telling us that you very much do not. It's wild. I don't know if I've seen something quite like this in MMA.
He's just so cumbersome, isn't he? Like
he looks stiff. He looks stiff. He looks like he's just like you look at some of what he's doing and you're just like, this can't work. This can't keep working. But it does. It does.
He's not only beating quality middleweights, he's beating like legendary middleweights. Yeah. Like if you looked at the last, this era, whenever you look at this current era of middleweight, Like 3 names probably jump out, and really two, because like Alex Pereira would be one of those names, but he didn't have the longevity in the division. He was kind of here and then left. But like the other two names are Izzy and Rob. And Dricus has just like made it look so easy against both of them in a way that was comical. And that's like, I love Dricus so much because exactly everything we're saying here. Like, it's obvious that he's not good, yet he is so good. And none of it makes sense. And that to me, like, tickles me in a really great way. Like, that's the most delightful version of a lot of this in MMA for me, is like you find these weird, unique characters who sometimes like somehow it shouldn't make sense, and yet it somehow makes perfect sense. I love it so much. But also, like, and we haven't seen it with this one, but the lead up to these fights, just making these dudes cry, like really just picking whatever are the worst version, like whatever's the most deep-seated thing inside of you, just picking it and like giggling about it while he's doing it and looking real proud of himself. Like, dude's just ice cold out there. I love it so much.
Well, and that is also, I mean, like you said, like one of the things that I love about MMA, and that has been sort of the promise from the very beginning, is regardless of what we think works, what we think should work, you lock the cage on Saturday night and you find out. And that is still the core promise that the UFC and that MMA and that fight sports in general offer to people, and that we can't turn away from even at times when we wish we could, is because so many other areas of the culture and society, you get a lot of people claiming to be one thing and it's never fully tested in a way that's going to give you a pass fail answer. And here it is. You go out there, we can say that we think he sucks. People can look at like post clips of him throwing looping right hands on Reddit all they want and be like, this guy isn't very good, but we're going to find out. You're going to have the fights. You're going to lock the cage door. You're going to find out. And if he wins the fights, then he won. And like, you can't say it doesn't work if it keeps working. Just like we found out that the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was better than the strip mall karate in the early days. You find out that even though we don't think Dricus looks like he should be a great UFC champion, at least so far, nobody been able to beat him. And that says something.
No, not only has nobody been able to beat him, but like the course is laid out for him right now in 2025, where like say he beats Sean, and say he looks impressively. If he is able to then transition into Khamzat and then beating Khamzat Chimaev, and that's the start of your title reign.
Wow.
Is beating Sean Strickland twice, having already beaten Rob, finishing him, and then finishing Izzy, and then beating Khamzat Chimaev. Like, we're probably looking at DDP as fighter of the year for 2025.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? Or at least like top 2 type of consideration, but also be like, that is amongst the start of title runs ever. Like we said it with, you know, Ilya Topuria last year, of like those 2 knockouts to start out the title run, got to be one of the best back-to-back wins ever. Amongst a start to a middleweight title run, that's got to be right up there as one of the greatest ever, if he's able to get through this year that is laid out in front of him. Like, everyone out here who's saying that he's not good and has said that for years, watching this year play out, if he's able to do that, it'll be something, man. It'd be incredible.
Absolutely. Just before we move on to the co-main event, I wanted to talk about the staph infection on Sean Strickland's arm. Like, I feel like a lot of us are like, oh, well, it's going to go to decision. This is the way Strickland fights. But staph infections can have profound effects on performance, as well as like stamina and output. And that, of course, is Strickland's secret weapon. Ben, do you think that's going to play at all into this fight, like this staph infection that he clearly seems to have on his arm?
It could. I mean, we've seen fighters who, especially when they're dealing with staph, if they're on antibiotics and depending on how they feel when they go in there, it has had an effect on them. I mean, as somebody who did years and years of jiu-jitsu, I know my way around a staph infection, and it's no joke, man. Like, so, I mean, I've had some where it's just like, okay, it clears up pretty easily, but then I've had some where I'm just like, the next thing you know, you're sitting in the urgent care at the mall, having them open up your arm and drain it while you feel the color like going out of your face. I'll tell you, try to go eat a pretzel dipped in nacho cheese after that happens in the mall food court, and you know, it's a memorable experience. So a staph infection that could be kind of a big deal going into this, especially if the way Sean Strickland fights kind of depends on him being able to keep up a high output over a long period of time. And, you know, it's still an MMA fight, so anything could happen. Maybe he goes in there, he catches Dricus with something early. We saw him tag Izzy early in a fight that we all thought he was going to lose, so who knows? But it also makes me wonder if it could affect that strategy. If you have questions about your own cardio, about your own ability to maintain that high output over 5 rounds, does it make you fight differently? because that could play right into what Dricus does, honestly.
We saw it again, Benoit Saint-Denis against Dustin Poirier, right? He had a massive, massive output early, and then he just absolutely disappeared after it. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. Moving on to the co-main event, Shaheen, I want to ask Tatiana Suarez. We last saw her in August 2023 against Jessica Andrade, which I guess you could argue is one of our best wins, right? Like it's one of our best wins. So to that, I would ask, how much of a step up is she in for? You know, when she gets in there with Zhang Weili, it feels like quite a significant one for me, based especially on where Jessica's career has gone, on that run that she was on, you know, with Tatiana's fight being in the mix of that. Like, how much of a step up is Zhang Weili for her?
I'll answer your question, but first I can't get past this. Keeps going over my brain. Ben, y'all got like you got like ERs in your malls out there in Montana?
Urgent care. It's not an ER, it's an urgent care, but it's in the
That's a
mall.
good point.
It's in the mall?
It's in the mall. I mean, all of them, it's either you can choose between the urgent care that's in the actual shopping mall, like, you know, between a Lululemon and a Hollister store, basically, or you can go to the urgent care that's next to the Albertsons and the Ace Hardware. Like, those are your kind of options. I'll tell you what, when I went in there, and like an idiot, I put off going to the doctor for as long as possible, being like, this is fine. Yeah, like my arm is bulging and feels hot to the touch, but it's going to be fine. And then finally went in there and was like, I think I got a staph infection on the jujitsu mats. And they're like, yeah, man, you have an abscess in your arm. And they were like, do you want to go to like your own like primary care physician to have it? And I was like, primary care physician? I live in America, bro. I don't have a primary care physician. Like, cut it open. Fix stuff that gauze down in there and let's get out of here. It was deeply unpleasant. Still have the hole, kind of the mark of where the hole was in my forearm. So yeah, staph. Don't play around with that staph. I know exactly how I got it. Digging for an arm bar, scraped up my arm. You know, the mats maybe weren't as clean as they could have been. And the next thing you know, you're in the urgent care in the mall.
My brother had the same exact staffing on his forearm. He still has the mark too. Exactly the same thing. It's insane. Ugh. So like, oh no, I won't even go down this rabbit hole. I could keep talking about staph infections. I won't do that to the audience.
What a nice little Saturday. Nice little Saturday afternoon. Stop by, get a slice, maybe get some C's candy. Stop by the mall ER. The mall.
I seriously
sat
there. I sat there in the food court and ate a Annie's, like Auntie Annie's pretzel dipped in nacho cheese with like my trembling hand after this extremely painful, harrowing experience. And I was just like, I can't go home yet. Like I gotta kind of sit here for a second and process what the heck just happened. And then I'll go home with my huge bandaged arm and just like, when they take that gauze out of your, because you got to go back every other day, have them take it out, repack it with gauze. And it's like 3 feet of gauze that they stuff down in your arm. It's a lot, man.
It's rotten. Jesus Christ, mate. Oh,
Missoula really just sounds like a wonderful, magical place.
Yeah, you should come visit.
I gotta come visit someday. So back to whatever you asked me, Pete. I think it was about something about Tatiana Suarez and her level of competition. I don't know, man. I'm gonna try to make some sense out of it, but like, this to me is the real main event of this weekend.
Yeah,
and I feel like I'm not alone in saying that. I've had several people come to me with that as well. Just because this is this is the complete opposite of essentially what we're getting with the main event, right? Where like, that's a main event. Not a lot of people have been asking for it. And we just saw it last year. Whereas this thing is like genuinely a decade in the making. Like I bought my ticket to the Tatiana Suarez bandwagon a decade ago, basically 2016, when she was coming out of the Ultimate Fighter and she had the story of overcoming cancer, basically like cancer ruining her Olympic dreams. And then she comes on the Ultimate Fighter, dominates everyone on the Ultimate Fighter, wins the Ultimate Fighter with a first round submission, and then just immediately starts barnstorming all over this division. You look at her resume and it's so brief, right? Because she has had these long periods of inactivity and we just forget about her. And then all of a sudden she reappears and rattles off another win over a former champion. And yet this resume still looks incredible because it aged so well, right? First round win over Alexa Grasso, beating the crap out of Carla Esparza, beating Jessica Andrade. I remember being there in Dallas when she beat Carla Esparza. And that was like the big test, right? Because Carla is this wrestler, former champ, who's good at what Tatiana is. And can basically the two negate each other, who's going to be the better wrestler. And that wasn't even close Like that wasn't even a competitive fight. That is some of the worst that Carla Esparza has looked throughout her, what is basically a Hall of Fame UFC career. And just it's this moment has been forever for Tatiana Suarez. And frankly, I lost hope a couple times during it. Obviously, the 4-year layoff from 2019 to 2023, it just felt like she was never going to be able to do that. And she was basically TJ Grant. But then she comes back and she gets 2 wins and looks good. And then this past year, at the end of the year, when she's supposed to fight Verna Jandiroba for this sort of number 1 contender fight, and she can't even make it to that, and she doesn't end up fighting all last year. Like, I'm not going to lie, I closed out of December just kind of thinking this was never going to happen. And so the fact that we're here, we're 24 hours out, you can still jinx it. Like, she can still slip on a banana peel. She can still mess up.
No, she can't. Come on.
Or a knee or any of the various things that she's ruined over the years. But I just can't wait. I'm so looking forward to this because it is very rare that we get these type of figures who come into the game with a level of inevitability around them. And that's sort of like the frustration with the Hamzat thing too, because that was exactly the same thing of, oh, well, this guy's obviously going to fight for titles and be winning belts pretty soon. We've been saying that for Tatiana forever. So to finally reach the culmination of that inevitability, whether she does it or not, like this to me, I'm just glad that it ended up happening. And the UFC, frankly, did the right thing by just saying, screw it. Like, we've put enough number 1 contender fights in front of her. Just give her the title shot. Just do it. Just go ahead and do it so we can get it over with. I'm just happy that it's here, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Ben, how much is Zhang going to struggle with this wrestle heavy approach from Tatiana? Like, she almost looks like a female Habib at times. Her top position is absolutely insane, as well as her takedown ability. Like, do you expect this to be a big struggle for the champ?
Honestly, I think people are sleeping on the champ a little bit here. I think Weili is just so good everywhere. We've seen that her wrestling has come a long way. I interviewed her and did a story that should be up today sometime where she talked about how, prior to 2021, she didn't really do much wrestling. And look at how good she's gotten at it in such a short period of time. Not only to just get to a point where wrestling is not a weakness in her game, but she can use it as a strength against other people. And I think that she is, at this point, such a well-rounded fighter, such a complete fighter. Tatiana Suarez has that one strength, but I think you look at them side by side and you have to say that Weili is the better, more complete all-around fighter. It's just a question of, can you negate that one strength well enough to do it, to show it? Because I think that she's so seasoned as a champion at this point. She's been in some of those big fights. She's been in those big moments. And here you have Tatiana Suarez having a big step up, not only in competition, but just in terms of her share of the spotlight, plus just not having been able to compete all that often, all that regularly. And, you hope that she's going in at 100%, but especially with some of that stuff that she's dealt with, some of the, neck and back, just any sort of like vertebral disc stuff can be a chronic issue. And imagine if she weren't exactly 100%, she would fight anyway for something like this because she can't pull out. It's never going to come again. This is a now or never kind of opportunity for her. So she's got to go in there and fight and try to do what she can. I agree with people that look at those strengths and be like, hey, that could be tough to deal with. But I also think that if there's a fighter, I think, who can figure it out, tailor her game plan to the opponent, and is also just, let's say, incredibly strong for the division, I think Zhang Weili might be it. I think that I was surprised to see her as a little bit of an underdog here. And I think that's an underdog worth looking at if you're the betting type.
Shaheen, you mentioned the inactivity, all of these things. How reluctant do you think UFC are in terms of putting her in this spot? Obviously, she got the fight. As you said, there's been an inevitability about her being in this moment. But, her record speaks for itself in terms of injuries and things like that. Do you think the UFC are worried about this? Her potentially winning this title and potentially freezing up the division due to injury?
I think there's probably an element to that, certainly. We've seen it just over the course of this whole road, continually putting the number 1 contender fights in front of her, right? Like, okay, like we know you're sort of here, but can you just win this last one? And then something inevitably goes wrong. I guess the fact that it took us this long to reach this point, I can see some level of hesitance with that. But also, like, is the UFC ever upset that they have an interim title out there and another title they can go ahead and throw on an event and be like, hey, 2 title fights, look at this type of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, the UFC is going to be fine. regardless. So I don't know that they're carrying one way or another too heavily, but I could see some initial hesitance for sure. Because I mean, it's the nature of her career that the only consistent thing is her inconsistency to make these fights. And so that's just, I mean, that's something we got to deal with, especially if you become champion.
Let's do quick picks then for co-main event. We'll move on to the main event. Shaheen, for the co-main, who are you going with? I think I know, but
I mean, I can't jump off now, man. I've been on this for almost 10 years. It's Tatiana Suarez. I will say, of anyone else that she could have fought at this point, right? Reaching sort of the top of the pyramid, the Shang Tsung on the Mortal Kombat ladder. Like, if this could have been the champion sitting there for her, this feels like the hardest possible version of it. Because everything that Ben just said, like, Zhang is so incredible in every facet of the game. And not only that, but she has that dog in her in a way that very few do, right? Like, we look back at the Joanna and Jake first fight, like I was in the arena for that, and it's one of the most incredible experiences just as a human being that I have ever experienced, seeing her reach that level and grab whatever was within her for that. So this is like, people who are forecasting that this is some easy fight or walkover for Suarez, that seems insane to me, because that's just not a thing with Zhang. Like, I have very legitimate concerns that this is just the wrong type of matchup for Suarez, but ultimately I can't jump off now. I think Tatiana wins it, and I'd say like 4th round stoppage.
I'm going to go with Tatiana too, Ben. So what's it going to be, mate?
I'm taking Zhang. I'm taking Zhang Weili on this one. Wow. I get it. I get what everybody's saying. I think we're also basing a little bit of the Tatiana Suarez hype on potential, what we see as like where we think she could go as a fighter, whereas Zhang Weili has shown you over and over again how good she is. I got to go with the champ, the veteran, the savvy veteran experience here.
Well, okay. And for the main event,
well, just quick, like
a retort. Here we go.
Like, I don't even know that we're basing it on potential, right? I feel like we're almost basing it on the same way that, like, the people who are picking Mike Tyson to pick Jake Paul, like, we're basing it on nostalgia, on like what this should have been instead of like who she is now. Like, there's a very real case that she is just not that person because she has been so diminished by all of these injuries. Mm-hmm. So like, the version of her 5 years ago probably maybe could have won this fight, but the version of her today, that to me is like the biggest question of just like, it's not even potential. It's just like, how much of you is still left after all of this? I don't know.
Interesting. I'm going to go in the main event. I'm going with DDP. I think he's going to stop him too. That staph infection, I don't know, man. You're traveling all that way. If you're diminished even slightly against this guy who's like the opposite of Merab being a guy that we're like, oh, he's definitely going to come on in the second half of the fight. And DDP being a guy where like he is already cooked and it's halfway through the first round, but somehow goes ahead and keeps going for the remainder of the fight. I'm going with DDP. Ben, who are you going with?
I'm also going with DDP. I think that we probably end up seeing a fight that looks a lot like the first one, and that is probably pretty close. I think Sean Strickland is in it. You know, I think that he's got a chance here, but I do think that DDP probably wins another 5-round decision.
Shaheen, what are you saying, mate?
Yeah, I'm with Ben. I think you could run this fight back 10 times and it's probably going to look similar.
And look how excited we all are for this.
I mean, it speaks to what this is. I don't feel like anybody's like at peak 10 out of 10 excitement for this, man. We just saw it, you know, and it doesn't feel deserved, frankly. Like, it feels like it's just sort of being shoehorned in there. But yeah, I'd go DDP by 5-round decision. I think these dudes fight 10 times. It's 6-4 one way or another, just because of the nature of Sean Strickland fights. So it really depends on what kind of judges you get. And that is so cliche to say, but like, some judges understand what Sean's doing and favor it, and some judges are just completely oblivious to it when, as Ben framed it earlier this week in a column for us, DDP's out here looking like he's throwing rocks from his back pocket with every punch he's throwing. Like, it's hard to beat that visual, you know? So yeah, I'm going DDP by decision.
Listen, we wanted to break down the entire card, but we're running out of time, and I wanted to jump to something else.
Oh no!
No, sorry, lads.
Oh no!
Before you go, big retirement this week. The great Dominick Cruz, a guy who will be considered the greatest bantamweight of all time for many, this guy included. But I know you guys would have spent a lot more time covering Cruz than I have, and I'd love to just hear your reaction to this. I think the first time I saw Cruz in person fight was his return bout against Takeya Mizugaki. If you can remember that at UFC 178. I think he was like the very first fight on the card. He kind of been forgotten about, came in and starched a dude. And what comes to mind when you think of his great career?
You know, what comes to mind for me is I went and covered the final WEC show when, Zuffa had bought it and was shutting it down. And they kind of fired all the bullets in the gun with that final WEC show in Glendale, Arizona. And Dominick Cruz was defending the title there. And Scott Jorgensen, I believe it was. And
Wow, yeah.
it was the closest I've ever come to feeling like this is what it would look like if a person had to try to fight a ghost. Because he just couldn't find Dominick Cruz at all in that fight. It just the footwork, the style that Dominick Cruz employed, it was a mystery to him. And you're watching it and you're thinking like, this guy is tough, but he has no chance because he can't find. And I remember over in Scott Jorgensen's corner was Joe Warren, the very outspoken and loud Joe Warren, who you're going to hear no matter where he is in the building. And his advice was not super helpful for Scott Jorgensen because he just kept saying, put your hands on him, Scotty. Come on, Scotty. Let's go. Put your hands on him. And it's just like, he can't put his hands on him, man. He doesn't have any idea where he is. And he's just getting hit with punches that he never sees coming. And the thing that was really impressive as I was watching it from cage side was Dominick Cruz had that ability, especially back then, where like a really good pitcher he can throw a fastball, he can throw a curve, he can throw a slider, he can throw a changeup, and his arm and his delivery and the angle of the ball in his hand, it looks exactly the same every single time. He's giving you no hints as to what is coming, and that's what Dominick Cruz was doing. He could throw that lead right hand at you, or he could dive in with that knee tap takedown, and the setup and the approach to it looked exactly the same. And it was just, Scott Jorgensen was just guessing out there. And it was amazing to watch. It was just like watching a guy put on this master class where he couldn't be touched, and went like, okay, I'm glad that they're absorbing the WEC roster because this guy is going to do great things. And then, of course, there's another guy where lost a lot of his prime due to injuries. I mean, I think we've never seen anybody just as unlucky with injuries as Dominick Cruz was.
Well said. Well said. Shaheen, what comes to mind for you?
It's interesting because, like, I'm obviously an Arizona guy, and so is Dominick. You know, he came up in the Arizona scene. Like when I was a kid, Rage in the Cage was the dominant force in Arizona MMA, and Cruz fought the majority of his early career in Rage in the Cage. But by the time he got to WEC 53, because like Ben, I was at that show. That was actually the first MMA event I ever got to cover in person.
Wow.
Dude, starting off right. Like you leave that show, it's like, all right, this is a pretty cool gig. I should figure out a way to do this for a living. By the time, like the evolution from Cruz in those early Rage in the Cage days to wherever he reached by WEC 53, even because by that point he was more or less a finished product. Like Dom has kind of been the same guy for the past decade for the most part. He felt so far ahead of what everybody else in that entire division, and basically in the entire sport felt like at that point in time. Like when you sat down and really watched him work over Scott Jorgensen. Ben, you're comparing him to a pitcher who has all the pitches. I always compared him to like a knuckleballer, like a Tim Wakefield type, where like all these guys are used to the dudes who can throw 100 miles an hour down the strike zone or like a slider down at their feet. But then Tim Wakefield comes out and he's throwing these 70-mile-an-hour knuckleballs that just move in ways that no one understands and no one knows what they're looking at. No one knows how to react to it. And that almost felt like prime Dominick Cruz, because like, how are you going to prepare? How can you possibly prepare and emulate this man in the training room to like understand what you're looking at? There's no ability whatsoever to really fully like comprehend what you're stepping into until you get in there. And this dude is zigging this way and zagging that way and ducking, and all of a sudden, like, it feels like nothing he's doing makes sense. And you're on like minute 23 of the fight before you finally pick up like the first pattern of that he's throwing out at you. It just, the levels to which he was so far ahead of everyone at that point in time. I mean, to me, he's still the bantamweight GOAT. He's still the greatest bantamweight that we've ever seen, just for longevity in terms of title defenses. And again, where he was against his, like, that's a weird division, right? So like, we haven't seen like a super dominant champion. So to me, I still hold him in that regard. But my favorite moment, Petesy, is actually the one that you mentioned, was at UFC 178. Because Dominick Cruz, I think, was the last fight before the pay-per-view, and that was
that what it was, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And so he was like that tone setter before the pay-per-view. And he was kind of flying under the radar because we hadn't seen him for a long time and no one knew what to expect from him. And I'll never forget it. He walks out to How I Could Just Kill a Man. I think the Cypress version, it might have been the Rage version. I think it was the Cypress version. And it just felt so fitting for whatever his whole vibe had been that week. He was a man on a mission. He comes out and he just destroys Mizugaki in a matter of like a minute. And if you know Dom, like that's just not how Dominick Cruz fights.
Exactly, yeah.
Like Dominick Cruz is coming out and he's having 15-minute battles of technical precision, you know? He's not coming out and starching a dude in a minute. And to see that whole 20 minutes in that arena was just electric. And that always sticks with me. And then obviously just one of the classiest guys in defeat that I think you could ever see in professional sports, period, right? Like you look at his press conference when he lost the belt to Cody Garbrandt, who like they had a very heated lead up, and there was a lot of things said in the lead up to that fight. And then Dominick Cruz, like frankly, got styled upon in a way that we had never really seen before. And it was extraordinarily eye-opening. And for Dom, within a span of that hour post-fight to the press conference, to be able to flip sort of his mindset and approach that press conference in the way that he did, the one where I think that's the one where he's standing up the entire time.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just like, if you ever need to show somebody like, hey, here's how you handle a defeat properly, in particular, like a really like noteworthy defeat in your career, just watch that press conference. It's incredible, man. There's only one Dominick Cruz.
You know, yeah, I talked to him about that, especially recently where I worked on a story. I can't remember now exactly what the whole thing of the story was, but about where I asked him about that moment, and he was saying how he is surprised how other fighters don't do that or how they can't do that. And he was saying you'll never learn the lessons and grow if you can't bring yourself to kind of look at it and be honest with yourself about what happened out there and give an honest assessment. And it's worth noting that fight, the one he lost to Cody Garbrandt, that was the co-main event of UFC 207. The main event was Amanda Nunes beating the brakes off of Ronda Rousey, who, for all her many positive qualities as a fighter, never could bring herself to do that. She was the one who went into hiding, had the pillow over her face, didn't want to ever talk, had a lot to say when she won, had nothing to say when she lost. And like, she was the absolute antithesis of what Dominick Cruz was able to do, to show up and talk about that and give an honest assessment of it. And like that contrast is one thing I've never forgotten.
That's crazy hilarious. Contrast. I never put
hilarious.
Revisionist history, I never put those fights together. That's insane.
Yeah.
Like it's just
in particular that week too, because if you remember, that was the week where Ronda Rousey,
she didn't do any media.
We didn't see her the entire week. Like our companies were paying for us to go out to Vegas so we could talk to Ronda Rousey, and then she did literally zero with anybody the entire week. And then same post fight. You're right, Ben. I haven't put that parallel together. That's
archetypal good loser and bad loser. Like, that is absolutely mental. Lads, well, sorry, Dominick Cruz, congratulations. You are a legend. We will continue to love how you speak about the fight game. You had Ariel Helwani tied in ribbons there a couple of weeks ago when you come on the show. I'm looking forward to plenty more of that. And on that point, thank you to Ariel Helwani for coming on earlier and giving us the lowdown with Canelo Alvarez and Jake Paul and Riyadh Season and TKO and MVP, all that wild stuff. He's going to be talking about that more on Monday, of course. On Saturday, tomorrow, I believe there will be the lads doing the watch along for 312 from Australia as well. Thank you so much to the great Shaheen Al-Shatti, editor-in-chief at Uncrowned, one of the greatest writers of all time, Mr. Ben Fowlkes. Thank you to On Air Jordan. Thank you to Oscar Losef. And thank you to all the crackheads. What an event. I mean, all of the legends out today to talk to Petesy Carroll on his wonderful Friday show. We love you very much. Enjoy the fights. See you on Monday. Mwah.